So, let me pray for a minute, as I customarily do, even when I'm preaching. Summon God and the Holy Spirit to help me. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth. For I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. God, I simply thank you this morning for this privilege to stand behind this desk in front of my colleagues, in front of my peers, in front of the world, proclaiming that you are God all by yourself. God, I've studied, and you know that I'm willing, but I'm fully aware that only you can make me able. Ready, my Lord, thy will to see, open mine eyes, illumine me. Spirit divine, come and speak. Amen. Let me again say that it is a great privilege to be here. And again, this is nothing short of an incredible blessing. This is my third Congress. And one of the things that I enjoy most, seeing all my friends and colleagues who are really an extension of my family. And I so appreciate just seeing all of you and the friendships that we have made over time. And then again, in this discipline of sports chaplaincy, how we support each other and have over time. Let me thank the conference organizers for even thinking of me. I want to thank my friend, Dr. Andy Parker, for, in a big way, twisting my arm a little bit. He called me back in January and says, hey, I really want you to think about keynoting. And I said to Andy, first thing out of my mouth was, Andy, I'm not sure I'm going to be there, man, because, I'm a survivor of COVID pneumonia. And I shudder to think about the fact that while en route or in an airport someplace, that somebody would cough or breathe and I'd have to go through that again. And so in a very meaningful way, I told Andy, I said, you know what, I'm going to watch the numbers, and if God tells me to be here, my friend, you can count on me, and thus I am here today. I also want to thank some close friends who really put on their thinking caps and help me frame a few humble words that I'm going to say today, right out of the gate. Let me thank my friend who allegedly had a heart attack this morning in chapel, Brad Kinney. And I want you to know, Andy, that really wasn't funny, man. I sat there and I'm thinking, okay, let me pray. And then I look at the back and there's Brad, so that was insane. Let me thank my pal Bob Dyer. Again, we talk not as much as we should, but I always enjoy chatting with him whenever I ever get the opportunity. My good friend and good buddy, Warren Evans. And Warren, again, I'm going to say, if you're ever close to me, close as you were in Chattanooga, hopefully this time I will be available. Some of you know that my oldest daughter, Melissa, just happened to have a mini stroke at 40 years old back in June. And so I've spent the bulk of my summer in Atlanta, helping with her care and getting her back to some sense of normalcy. And I'm happy to say that God is still able. She is home now. She is yakking my ear off, so as she normally does. But I thank many of you for those prayers. I also want to thank my friend, Reverend Johnny Shelton, who is a chaplain with the Baltimore Ravens. Johnny and I don't talk a lot, but every now and then we're able to connect. And if you have never had an opportunity to talk with him, he is one person you want to get to know. Phenomenal spirit, wonderful chaplain to that team, and to those who are working as sport chaplains. Let me thank my former teammates, the Reverend Curtis Calloway, who helps to shepherd the Ohio State Buckeyes, my buddy, the Reverend Dr. Harold Cottom, who does respite care these days, but also does a small amount of work with the Dayton Dragons in Dayton, Ohio. And then my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Chris Zacharias, who is on the faculty at Howard University Divinity School, but also does some chaplaincy work with the Washington football team. And I'm not sure what to call them these days because they've changed their name so many times. So I'm not sure what they really are at this point. But I do know that Chris goes over there and does really good work. And let me thank my youngest child, Jonathan, who's sitting over here in the corner. Some of you had the pleasure of meeting him last night. I tell people all the time that the jewels in the crown of a father's life are his children. And I'm real proud of that guy. I think he came with me this time around to chaperone his old broken down dad. I think he believes that I don't know how to call Uber. And then I'm prone for getting lost at airports and things of that sort. And these days, because of a bunch of metal pieces and metal parts, I don't walk as quickly as I used to. But I think he's here today, not only to enjoy our company here, but to make sure his pop gets from A to B on time. And so, again, I am so very, very thankful. I'm here today for a couple of reasons. One, when we start to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only here in America, but throughout the planet, that is a topic that is near and dear to me, and I will reveal to you why that matters to me. But more importantly, as a Black American male, my lived experience has been in real time and real color. It has been colorized in a number of ways, in which I will tell you shortly. I've been one of those people who has always had to live at the intersection of my blackness, the power dynamic in society, being a former college football player, thinking about critically what it means to utilize for the labor of sport Black and brown bodies. That's a topic that we're thinking about more and more as the days go by, particularly in light of the slaying of George Floyd. There comes a level of woundedness with that. Not so obvious to the human eye, but trust me, it is there. It is definitely there because I work with a number of athletes who are the walking wounded in a spiritual sense. And most importantly, much of what I talk about mirrors the actual real-time work that I do with people in sport these days, not only as a pastor, but also in many cases as their chaplain. And so again, this is just one of those critical things that makes a big difference in my life. I want to show you this one. This is a common sentiment. On the surface, it may appear these words are racist, but they reflect the lived experience of about 13% of the population of the United States, but I would also suggest that in other places in the world, this sentiment is relatively common. Now note what it says. The most dangerous place for Black people in America to live is in the imagination of white people. You don't have to like it, but it's true. Very much true in a number of ways. My experience with all this started some years ago as an 18-year-old that left Flint, Michigan, a city that was 49% Black in the early 1970s. I just happened to go to school at this place with a red circle around it, Ferris State University. Back then it was Ferris State College in Big Rapids, Michigan. Now, I'm laughing because Big Rapids, at that point in time, had a total of about 4,000 people in it at best. It was an interesting place. For as much as I'm a cold weather person, this is the part of Michigan you don't want to trek into. That's right where the snow line is. I mean, I never dreamed that in late October, early November, I would be sticking my hands inside my pants to keep them warm because it's now snowing outside. This school had approximately 9,000 students in it when I was there. Of that base number, there were probably 450 of us that were African American. About 155 of those were actually athletes, which is kind of interesting. This is a city that was underdeveloped, and I say that for this reason. In most of the cities where we have major universities, most of the cities where you live, you have enterprises such as McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's. Those did not exist. The best we had in that era was a little place called Burger Chef. And that was in the downtown area. And literally, you could drive 3 blocks and be out of the downtown area. Now, what made this precarious is simply this. Most of us lived in the athletes complex on the south end of campus. And so thus, if you missed dining on Sunday, your meal had to come from Burger Chef. In that era, most freshmen, sophomore, and juniors could not have cars. And so wherever you went, you had to walk. So the journey went something like this. You would walk through campus, you would walk through the residential area. Now bear in mind, in that era, there were 5 black professors that actually taught at this institution. They did not live in that area, they lived on the outskirts of the city. And so imagine this, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you see this collection of African American athletes that are now walking through your neighborhood. All right, now think about that, and let's think pragmatically, okay? That can be a frightening thing, okay? So subsequently, the Mecosta County Sheriff's Department was summoned, and they would follow us all the way from the backside of campus to Burger Chef. They would actually wait in the parking lot and follow us back to the westernmost edge of campus. My first experience was racial profiling. Okay, now remember, I grew up in Flint, Michigan, spent a lot of time in Detroit. Both those cities in that era were 49 to 50% black. So you definitely don't want to see this when in fact you're in this little tiny town that's barely on the map in a rural area of the upper middle part of Michigan. Those thoughts never stayed away from me. Now again, I'm going to talk to you about scars here soon. That one scarred me. Why are these white folks following me? When I'm here rendering service to the university, but also here to get an education. I'm not trying to break in anybody's home. I'm just walking to get a burger and some fries so I can eat. I wouldn't have to starve until Monday morning and the food center opened up again. But it was an interesting kind of journey for me that really opened my eyes to the reality that race really does matter, regardless of the fact that I'm a born-again Christian, have been since I was 8 years old. That didn't matter for some folks. I showed you this frame here before, but let me spend some time talking about the principle here. On the screen is George Floyd. Again, most of us know who he is by probably this photograph here. That's his daughter. Okay, now it's kind of interesting how over time we have demonized, we have almost prematurely criminalized George Floyd in many, many ways in the media and in our public conversations. What we forget about is the fact that he was a family man. This is a man, a black man with a family, had a spouse and 5 children. 3 of his children were adults. He had this little girl, we'll go back to her, and then a teenage daughter. But it's kind of interesting in the narratives, nobody talks about that. Essentially, what you see is that. We seldom consider him. Again, Imago Dei, made in the very image of God. But again, very quickly we've demonized, we've criminalized who this man is, and suddenly we project that onto others that look like me, which is highly, highly unfortunate. I thought to myself as I was doing some research on George Floyd. This guy, number 88 with the circle around him right there, 6 foot 6 inches tall, 240 pounds. Now I was sitting in my office one evening and I thought, like, what if I would have caught this guy coming across the middle? Boy, that would have been a mess. He probably would have walked on top of me and scored. I could just hear my defensive back coach saying to me on Sunday or Monday during film, "Yeah, what were you doing?" The simple fact is, look at the corner here. Now notice how that linebacker there is trying to cover the pass. Now notice George Floyd is folded up here, and the guy's coming over the top of him with what's called a hook move. He's trying to strip him, but notice that Floyd is totally in control here. All right, George Floyd was one of us, a person of sport. But how often do you hear that? You don't. You hear the story of a black man who was attempting to pass a counterfeited $20 bill. Now what's funny about that, he was never even charged. It's just the thought that a black man shows up with a $20 bill that looked funny. And subsequently, that changed the course of his life. Notice it, again, 6'6", 240, excelled in football, basketball. He was a scholarship athlete. Nobody talks about that. On the whole, over the span of George Floyd's life, he did more good than he did evil. At least as we can flush it out by researching through the media. Unfortunately, on that day in May 25th of 2020, I remember watching that on television. I remember deep inside there was a sense of anger. Anger. Deep anger. And I'll tell you why I was angry. I grew up in the 1960s. One of the things I saw were the riots of 1967, 68, post-assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Detroit, Los Angeles, Newark, places like that went up in smoke. Most people have not seen that in their lifetime, nor have you experienced that kind of despair. But the fact of the matter is, one of the common threads was violence perpetrated by the police against black citizens. And here we are, we're now in 2020, and somebody hit the play button, boom. And we're replaying that again. Michael Eric Dyson, the renowned scholar and activist, in his most recent book, Entertaining Race, Performing Blackness in America, did some interesting analysis. So one thing he analyzed was what's called the automortology of George Floyd. He looked at what George Floyd really said and potentially may have thought. I mean, these are words that were taken right from the script of George Floyd's last moments of his life. He said something like this, that he uttered, "Y'all, I'm going to die in here. I'm going to die, man. I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I'll probably die this way." Somewhat prophetic, because moments later, 8 minutes and 15 seconds later, he does pass away. Dyson notes in the early pages of his work, he said, eerily prophesies that Floyd, speaking, the Floyd eerily prophesied his fate in a post-mortem declaration as if the death deed was already done. "Tell my kids, I love them. I'm dead." Now in the middle of all this, Floyd is begging Officer Derek Chauvin to take the knee off his neck, right there. Now notice down here in the corner, the thick white saliva that's now coming out of his mouth. He literally is on his way out. And he's still pleading. As a matter of fact, there's some that say that in the waning moments of his death, he cries out for help from his mother. All right, now think about that. You're in this place of despair, and the last person you think about is not this officer with his knee on your neck, but the woman that gave him birth, the one that could save him. But unfortunately, it simply did not work out that way. What's really unfortunate is that this is just one death. Between 2014 and today, there have been 296 deaths, in which about 1% of police have had to account for those deaths. Everybody else walked away. Is it reasonable that a person of color should not think about this? I think about the student athletes I work with. Many of them come from urban areas. They come into Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville is about 8% black. So some people that means is out of every 10 people that you see on the street, a little less than about 8% look like you. Now remember, culturally this is a different norm because we are now in the buckle of the Bible Belt in the South. I moved there actually I came to Knoxville from Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is 48% black. And I'll have to confess, it was different for me. I'll tell you sometime how, as a 50-year-old college professor, I get stopped. I'm going to a Christmas party sponsored by one of the administrators in my college. I'm going up there, and she lives in a very ritzy neighborhood over off North Shore Drive in Knoxville. And to get there, you have to go around a winding road so you can't speed or else you're going to end over on the side of the road someplace. And so I'm driving, and again, the consummate old man car. I'm driving a Buick LeSabre Limited. That's the car that I raised my family in. You know, you can't speed into that. I own a Porsche Panamera now. Now that all my kids are grown and my wife and I can afford this, but the fact of the matter is that there was no way I was speeding. I look in my rearview mirror, I see the lights, and stop my car and classically have my hands on the steering wheel, roll the window down, and I said, "Good evening." And he said to me, "Can I see your license and your registration?" Now bear in mind, I'm a 50-year-old black man. I'm not a threat to anybody. Not even to myself. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, he went back to his vehicle, he checked to see if I had warrants. Of course I had no warrants. He comes back to the window and he says, "Well, you know why I stopped you, right?" I said, "No." He said, "You look like you were lost." Think about that. Now, it's dusk, and I look like I'm lost. Now again, I'm in a predominantly white neighborhood going to an event put on by an administrator in our college, and he just caught a glance of me. Boom. And he said I looked like I was lost. Classically. I said to him, "Well, no, I'm going up the road here about a block and a half to a Christmas party." And he says to me, "Okay, well, just be careful, have a good evening." And I said, "You too, officer." Now bear in mind, as full as I am of the Holy Spirit, I had some pretty spirited things to say as I was pulling off and going on to my Christmas party. Remember that statement I showed you earlier? Right there? That's one reason why that's a line of thought these days. It's not just George Floyd. There's many, many others. As a matter of fact, as we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the contemporary era, there's a term that's commonly used, and many of you probably know this, BIPOC. Black, indigenous people of color. Inclusive of natives, those that are of color, that are from different places in the world that kind of move into the United States. Again, this is an interesting term predominantly used in the U.S., but it applies. The day that George Floyd was assassinated, I began to listen to this song. How many know the British group Salt? Okay, that's the same thing my son said. He said, "Dad, how do you know about this music?" And I kind of chuckled and I said to him, hey man, Apple Music. That was one of my favorites, you know. But then note the lyrics. And again, I was going to play it for you, but then again, I know that I'm talking a lot and I don't want to get cramped for time. But notice how they begin. Maybe you're uncomfortable with the fact that we're waking up. All right, what the term woke simply means that you are socially, politically, and racially aware. Okay? How do you turn hate to love? In other words, you glance at me and you stop me because I'm a black man. So how do we turn that from hate to love? How do you turn hate to love? Maybe you're uncomfortable with the fact we're waking up. Now note this piercing question in line 4. Why do you keep shooting us? Why do you keep shooting us? Now again, I'm noticing some heads just kind of looking this way and looking that way. That's fine. The fact of the matter is this is what your players go through. This is what your coaches are asking. Why do they keep shooting us? That's a very relevant question to brown and black people in society in the 21st century. Today is the 19th of August. And I can assure you someplace in the world somebody's asking this question. They go on into the second stanza. Oh, the way that you judge me, this is madness. All right, in the case of George Floyd, when Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck, he was judge, jury, and executioner. When we factor in 296 people were slaughtered at the hands of white police officers in the U.S. Judge, jury, executioner. Why do you judge me this way? This is madness. Now notice this, the second line in the second stanza. I'm praying, I'm hoping, believing in God's magic. Now again, this is a deep, sincere petition for God to intervene in this madness. These aren't just popular cultural lyrics by a British band. This is a prayer. When we think about black theology, particularly liberation theology, we think about at some point black folks wanted God to stop this, just as he did with the Hebrews coming out of Egypt. At some point, they've got to stop treating us like this. God, we need you right now to intervene. Stop this madness. Now, again, note the third line. Now, this is critical here. Every day is dangerous for me. Internal sadness. That is my son right there. His name is Jonathan Evan Branford Waller. I named him. I was there when he came forth out of his mother's womb. The first thing I did was lift him up, gave him back to God, because I knew what was going to happen to him. The fact of the matter is that we think about that particular lyric. And for folks of color, no matter where you have to traverse, particularly in contested, controlled spaces, like college campuses, it can be dangerous. It can be very, very dangerous. Scripturally, I thought about a passage that appears in Genesis 49, verses 1 through 3. The scenario here is that Jacob is getting ready to speak to his sons prophetically. And he says to them this: gather around so that I can tell you what's going to happen to you in the days to come. Hear me now, O sons of Israel. Again, Genesis 49, 1 through 2. I spoke to several chaplains, as a matter of fact 10. 5 black, 5 white. And I asked them one question in preparation for today's conversation. I asked them about the death of George Floyd and what that meant in terms of how their work was informed with athletes of color. And most of them had some very wonderful, rich comments to make. And what they said was significant. Matter of fact, part of what you heard thus far comes off the lips of some of my buddies sitting in this room. But let me tell you what the 5 black chaplains said. Here's what they said. Matter of fact, in all that we do in sport, here are a couple of things we need to add on that many of us are doing. First thing they said, that we have to help players and coaches locate God in the middle of racial chaos. All right, now think about that. How do we find God in the middle of this madness? In the depth and breadth of this flame, how is it that we can get God to speak back to us, to assure us that we are safe, that we will survive in a society that really does not embrace people of color in many ways? The second thing they said was this. You know, part of the duty and responsibility in the 21st century is to walk with these BIPOC athletes and coaches and administrators so that they can stay alive. All right, hear me again. We have to walk with them, stay close to them so they can stay alive. Let that marinate a little bit. To use one of my mother's terms. Let that marinate a little bit. Simply, you know, we need to be close. We need to hear them. We need to talk to them. We need to get in that lived experience to help keep them alive. I was reading a book this summer entitled The Talk, written by Jamie Hawley and Derek Floyd. How am I doing on time, Jonathan? You got 15 minutes? Oh, come on, man. You're supposed to be my buddy here with time. Okay. Well, one of the things that said that in communities of color, it is not odd to have this kind of conversation. You know, I've said to you, I've got 2 boys that I love dearly. They are everything to me. I have 4 children, and my children are absolutely incredible. They are everything to me. But I had to talk to my sons about how to stay alive when they went off to college. I don't want to put my son on the spot, but the thing about it is when he came to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, I said to him these words: geography, geography, geography. I wanted him to always remember where he was. We're not in the North anymore. We're in the South. The rules of engagement change for people that look like us. I'm not the only one that's having that conversation these days, folks. Some of you sitting in the crowd today who are blessed to have a number of athletes you're working with, probably have a number that are of color. Matter of fact, in college football, 70% of the people that play in Division I and II are black. In college basketball, same equivalent figure. So it's unfortunate, but as a part of our ministries, we have to continue to have this conversation. So, what happened in the aftermath of this slaying of George Floyd? Well, there are several things that happened. One that unfortunately happened at the wrong time in history. What exacerbated this problem was the COVID pandemic. The other top is, at the top, you see a slide that relates to inequities in healthcare. Okay, people were very quick to point to that as another racial problem in the United States. Thirdly, the aftermath of the 2020 election. Again, we're still wrestling with that in the states. Again, a contested election. Thirdly, the economy was just beginning to bottom out. Again, creating this system of haves and have-nots that became very racialized in the United States. And then fifth, the impact of COVID on sport. Okay, look at the spectatorship data and look at who's buying tickets. Okay, again, racialized, colorized. Everybody stay at home. Part of the business enterprise was very much affected, in many cases, for people of color. And then it raises this big question. Okay, now that we're shutting down churches, we're shutting down your ministries, we have to Zoom, we have to text, we have to resort to social media to really do ministry with people in sport. All those things complicated this already complicated problem. Two things this problem did. One, created some big moral injuries. And I would also offer that it created trauma. Okay? All right, when we talk about moral injury, again, this death of George Floyd, it adversely impacted people of color. In real time, you saw a person that looked like you being put to death. I don't know about anybody else in the room, I still carry that in my head. I carry it because I've got nephews that look like him. He's got a brother. I work with a lot of athletes, a couple I'm going to show you here momentarily, who are the darker skin hue. And I'm always painfully aware that this could happen to them. Secondly, this leaves a trauma. You may not see it. I can assure you that a player or a driver or someone that works on a pit crew or someone that is an associate athletic director in a major department across the country, they're not going to walk up to you and say that I'm traumatized. Not going to do that. But the fact of the matter is, they are. Just a thought, and I'm going to use this phrase. When I get caught sleeping, I could end up like George Floyd. As a chaplain, as an administrator, how do you wrestle with that? How do you wrestle with that? I think this act represents a kind of evil that we hadn't seen in a while. Again, part of my research line is that I study institutional evil, but I also am a big fan of the work of Terry Cooper and the latest book, Dimensions of Evil, Contemporary Perspectives. And Cooper talks about the fact that, again, borrows from Walter Wink, and some of you have probably read Walter Wink in seminary. Both argue that this kind of evil is like an undiagnosed disease. You can't really see it clearly. There's really no fix for it in society as it rages forward. You go back to Augustine, the African bishop of Hippo, and Augustine's work when it comes down to evil. And he kind of frames evil as anything that is terrible. In Latin, it's molum, or he also uses this term corruptio, which means corrupt, or something that is bastardized and bad. Okay? But evil is simply evil. The moment Derek Chauvin placed his knee on the neck of George Floyd and did not heed his cries for life, Wendy Farley talks about this idea of tragic and radical evil. That's what that was. It wasn't a bad man doing bad things. That was evil. Let's just call it what it is. Let's name it. It is definitely evil. And subsequently, by virtue of this fact, this evil happened in broad daylight. I'm going to use that as a metaphor. We got together over a 2-year period. Again, thinking beyond the death up to right now. What do? We had small conversations that hoped to address this elephant in the room, racism. Many of us started reading, and some of us got tied to reading circles. And we read a whole bunch of really cool stuff, like Ibrahim Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard to Talk About Race. Anybody read that one? Okay, all right. I can talk to you afterwards about that. But the fact of the matter is we began reading things like that with the hope of trying to wrestle with innately sometimes who we are, but then again who others are around us. Now again, that point is not directed at just white folks in the room. The same thing happened with black folks. Let me tell you what we were reading. We were reading things like woke racism, how a new religion has betrayed black America, or Georgetown theologian's Michael Eric Dyson's book, again mentioned earlier, Entertaining Race, Performing Blackness in America. I went back in that period and began reading some things that were written by Nigel Rooms. Some of you all know Nigel. I had the pleasure of working with Nigel post-conference 2016, and we published a special issue in practical theology. Great working with him, a great fellow. He wrote a wonderful paper using critical theology. Again, he talks about God and my whiteness. You ought to read that sometime. It's about what it means to be white in America, but also in other parts of the world, but also how you exercise your privilege. Now let's flip the script. The same applies to black folks. I'll be the first to tell you, I'm a very privileged black American. Income, I'm fine. Great family, my children are fine. I can pretty much go and come where I please. I am here with no problems. That's privilege. But that also has a lot to do with the way that I engage race in America. It's not the same as those that are downtrodden. We saw protests. Black Lives Matter, Breonna Taylor, don't forget her name, call her name. Some of you heard that. You've seen images like this in the media. This happened on my campus. These are folks from the BIPOC folks from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. In the front, our student athletes. That big fella right here, he's now Kansas City Chief. Okay? But again, he was the I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, the leader of the black student athletes in the football program on our campus. You cannot have an evil like this without protest. And the big thing about it is, you would protest if people that look like you were slaughtered. It's a natural response to evil. Well, again, I'm going to run out of time here shortly, so let me quickly move forward. All right, my son says, dude, you're done. All right, let me give you just a couple of things here real quick. I think one of the first steps that we should take as we move through this period and we begin to try and reconcile all that has happened here, I think we all have got to be open to talking about race. You know, for those that know your Bible, you know, God scrambled the language. Okay. Again, when we talk about this idea of the Tower of Babel, when folks were trying to get up to where God is, one of the ways he stopped that, he threw a wrench and all that, was to scramble the language. So we're all different. I would also call our attention to the book of Revelation. And again, there's an image there that I adore. I look forward to the day. But it doesn't matter what color we are. We'll all be in a place and a space of where we are in God, of God, and we are together. But until we get to that day, we've got to have these conversations that are very, very hard. The second thing is, again, we've got to care for folks compassionately. And again, when I talk about compassion, you know, I talk about Jesus in Matthew chapter 14. When he looks out over this crowd and he sees these folks, and the Bible says that, and he looked at them with compassion. All right, what he's not trying to do, even though inherently he does this, was not trying to be sympathetic. Empathy says, you know what, I get it. I feel what you feel, and man, you know, I feel bad for you. But the Bible says that he had compassion on them. In other words, he resolved to change their condition in that moment. And for those of us that are chaplains and administrators in athletic endeavors all over the world, that's what we've got to do. We've got to look at being more compassionate. Part of being compassionate is, in some cases, you've got to contextualize your ministry. There was a picture that flashed by back there. There's a fellow by the name of Victor Kidd, who is an African-American psychologist, works in the greater Washington, D.C. area. I use Vic a lot. Vic he played ball at the University of Maryland. And again, most of his clients are traumatized black athletes. Hey, look, if you're not quite grabbing this, part of what we do in this era is that we reach out. I like this idea of interprofessional teams. What you don't have, somebody else does. And what I love even more is that there are Christian psychologists, clinicians, mental health professionals that you can draw into your team. But again, we've got to look at the work in this era through compassionate eyes. And again, I don't have time to talk about Bill Russell, but I'm going to focus on these two real quick. I have been their chaplain for probably 6 years now. I've been a Sunday school teacher also. And notice the little caption here that says, photos displayed with permission. I talked to these two, and I told them I was going to be here today. And I also told them that I want to tell you about things that are going on in their lives. This fellow right here is at Wofford University. All state safety. Wofford signed him immediately. He started Wofford in June. Started summer. He calls me one evening and he says, Doc, I like this place. I chose this place because, I grew up with my grandparents. I want to be close to family. They treat me like family. But I was coming from practice, and a guy with a rebel flag on the back of his truck threw a bottle of urine out the window at me. Now remember, he's in South Carolina. And no offense to those from South Carolina. This is Tia Taylor. Tia Taylor is a world-class gymnast. Matter of fact, Tia is the 2021 World Team All-Around Silver Medalist. Tia is a freshman at the University of Tennessee. She walks into my office with her mother about a week and a half ago, and she says, Dr. Waller, I don't know whether I'm going to compete this year. I've just grown tired. And I said to her, what do you mean? Are you physically tired? She said, no. I'm tired of people commenting about my dark black skin as I travel abroad. All right, what do you do when these two tell you that? Has everything to do with race, geography, everything that I have taught them every Sunday in Sunday school now is being questioned in real time. They're experiencing the moral injuries and the trauma. Okay, we've got to think about new ministry models. Again, I would also offer, and I'm going to wrap up here, the theology that we use in our ministries. It's got to be more inclusive. It's got to include theologies that deal with the reality of struggle and suffering. And I'm going to leave that right there. I'm going to let you unpack that. I personally embraced black theologies by James Cone, the theology of Homer Asby Jr., who is a wonderful pastoral theologian out of Chicago Theological Seminary, has written a good body of work on working with black Americans in pastoral settings. But the bottom line is we've got to be more inclusive in our theologies. And Will, where are you, man? I wish I had time enough to really talk about the cutting edge work that's being done at the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. I know there are at least 3 of us in the room that have been active with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. They're one of the only chaplaincy organizations other than the Association of Professional Chaplains that I know that is actively engaging race in chaplaincy. They have a wonderful body of work. I mean, they're actively investigating what it means to minister to African American people. And what is the role of chaplains when we think about contextualized ministry? One of the things that I was impressed with, recently read this paper, The Black American Chaplain, an online reader. For the long 32 years, I've been involved in sports chaplaincy. I've never read anything about the first black chaplain. And my question is, why is it that we don't do that kind of work? It should be left to me and people that look like me. I read a lot of papers as a reviewer, as an editor, and I don't see us writing about the experiences of people of color. Why is that? You know they're there. I keep getting calls from people from Yale Divinity School, Chicago Theological Seminary. And they're asking me these questions that I don't have good answers to. We've got great scholars in this room. We've got chaplains here that have changed the game. At some point, folks, when we know better, we've got to start doing better. And you know what? I mean, we talk about servant leadership. Servant leadership says, all right, fine. I'm going to do my part to change this. What about you? And my son's going to grab me in just a minute. And so I'm going to close the door of this conversation. Again, as I think about this experience, I think about literally the shepherd that stands on the hillside. And with his crook, he stands there watchful, head turning right, head turning left. Landon just got back from Israel, and I was hoping that you might have seen that shepherd on that hill, watching as he tended to those sheep. And I think as chaplains, as administrators, as people of sport, we've got to be watchful in this era. I think being a servant leader, it mandates that we deal with the hard stuff on behalf of those sheep that we tend to, that we protect and we keep as a part of our stewardship. I would also offer that we think about healing, because really that's what this is about. It's about healing. I'm going to stop there. I appreciate this opportunity today. My hope is that I've already written a manuscript. I'm hoping that, as we've done in previous Congresses, that there'll be a journal someplace in which it can find a home. Okay. But again, I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint, send you my comments in rough form, should you desire those. Thank you all for being attentive and listening.